This part explains what automatic summarization is a study of. The object is not the text on the page, but the reader's next act. The chapter grounds the whole book by declining the shorter document reading of a summary and defining it instead as a compression relative to three fixed things: a purpose, an audience, and an input. Fix those three, and the task becomes measurable. Leave them free, and no output can be judged right or wrong. Everything downstream is a coordinate in that space rather than a taxonomy of techniques. Indicative versus informative, extract versus abstract, generic versus query-focused, each names a position along one of those axes. The engineering follows the erotetics. What question the summary must answer determines what may be thrown away. This section explains how professional abstractors actually work, and why that makes the job mechanizable. The abstractor never reads the document. In Andres Niggemeyer's study, 6 experts skim structure instead. A scheme, meaning prior knowledge of what a survey article or an experimental report looks like, is activated by the title and the layout, and relevant passages hang on to that scheme to build the theme, a rhetorical relation graph of aboutness. Production copies rather than composes. Standard sentence patterns absorb the lifted fragments. Mani reads this decomposition as a specification, and the chapter's function in the book is to hand the remaining chapters their module list, shallow cues in Chapter 3, cut and paste revision in Chapter 4, discourse structure in Chapter 5. The abstractor lacks the author's privileged access to the events behind the text. That lack is exactly what makes the work mechanizable. This section explains why extraction works by scoring rather than writing. If a system never generates text, the summarization problem collapses into scoring. One scalar per sentence, sorted, then truncated wherever the compression rate falls. Edmondson's equation. 3.1 is what the chapter is for. The weight of a sentence, written W of S, equals alpha times C of S, plus beta times K of S, plus gamma times L of S, plus delta times T of S. Those 4 terms are cue phrase, thematic term, location, and title or query overlap. Every system after Edmondson rereads those same 4 terms, or learns alpha through delta from a corpus, or tuning them by hand. The sentence wins as the unit for 2 reasons at once. It is a real linguistic object, and it is fine-grained enough to hit a compression target which paragraphs overshoot. Mani places extraction early as the cheap baseline the rest of the book must beat. Its admitted defect, sentences are scored in isolation, so coherence gets repaired afterwards rather than modeled. This section explains what revision changes about the unit of compression. Extraction's unit of compression is the whole sentence, coarse, paying for every clause it didn't want. Revision drops that unit to the constituent, eliminate parentheticals, aggregate a core referential clause from elsewhere into the draft sentence, smooth what remains. The quantity being maximized becomes information per unit compression rather than sentences chosen. Everything produced is still an extract. Nothing enters that wasn't in the source, which is why the chapter sits between extraction and abstraction. It exhausts what syntax alone can buy. Mani names the ceiling himself at the close. Coreference is blind to word sense and inference, so the generalization and specialization human abstractors perform stay unreachable without semantics. This section explains how discourse structure, rather than word content, decides which sentence survives compression. Position within a structure is what makes a sentence salient. The chapter splits that structure two ways, borrowing the distinction from Morris and Hurst. Cohesion is undirected connection, repetition, anaphora, synonymy, hypernymy. Drawn as a graph, its topology yields salience. This is the graph connectivity assumption, the structured analog of the older thematic term assumption. Coherence is directed, argument, contrast, purpose. It's rhetorical structure theory. Tree yields a theme by promoting nuclei toward the root. One move performed twice. Score a unit by its place in the whole. The genre-fixed scheme is the prior sitting over both. Extraction. In Chapter 3, counted terms. Here, those terms are wired together and topology does the ranking. This section explains what separates abstraction from extraction, and why that separation is what makes an abstract falsifiable. Extraction cuts, abstraction rewrites, and rewriting forces the machine to own a representation where salience lives outside the text. Every method in the chapter runs the same three-step pipeline: build a sentential semantics, apply selection, aggregation, and generalization over it, then generate. They differ only in what supplies the background concepts, De Jong's sketchy script. Fromm's constraint governs all of them. What a text turns out to be about is exactly what the knowledge structure already anticipated, so coverage and compression are the same parameter. Hence, the asymmetry with Chapter 3. An extract can be irrelevant, an abstract can be false, and fluent generation conceals which. Adding a second document changes what the object of summarization is. This section explains why multi-document summarization is a different problem from single-document summarization, not a scaled version of it. Mani's arithmetic makes it sharp. A 10% summary of a 100-document collection runs 10 times longer than any single document, so something near 0.1% is required. Sentence extraction spends its whole budget on leading sentences before it has said anything. What survives that compression is the relation structure over the collection. Radev's 24 relations, with equivalence, subsumption, contradiction, and follow-up doing most of the work. Redundancy turns into signal. Repetition across sources marks importance and simultaneously must be fused away. The chapter, therefore, turns the book's extraction machinery outward, from ranking sentences inside one text to reconciling claims across many. This section explains what happens when the book's summarization pipeline is pointed at media it cannot read. Multimedia summarization is the chapter where the three-phase pipeline, analysis, transformation, synthesis, meets images, video, and speech, and survives by borrowing salience from whatever channel happens to be linguistic. Every system, Mani surveys, performs the same move. The closed captions decide which video frames are key, the speech transcript decides which dialogue turns are summary-worthy, and the caption plus the running text decide which figure is salient. Non-text media are selected by proxy, never understood. The pixels and the waveform are transported, but the judgment about what matters was made in language and applied to them from outside. The chapter's function in the arc is therefore a stress test. It shows the text summarization machinery extending unchanged into new substrates, and it marks exactly where that extension thins with no meta-information and no salience. The whole apparatus is blind. This section explains how a summarizer gets evaluated when there is no right answer to compare against. Summarization has no correct output, so evaluation cannot measure distance from truth. Mani's move is to shift the object of validation away from the summary and onto the measure itself. Consider the evidence that a reference summary cannot serve as a standard. Human extractors agree at a kappa of 0.24 in SUMAC, and in Rath's Scientific American study, only 8% of picks were unanimous. A reference summary is therefore one more sample, not a yardstick. A scoring method earns trust by satisfying three properties: stability, similarity of similar summaries, and discrimination between different ones. An automatic score earns its use only where it correlates with human judgment on the same task. SUMIC's overlap metrics tracked manual answer recall closely, yet only for extracts. The one participant submitting named entity lists had to be excluded from automatic scoring. This section explains why the wish list at the end of the book is one problem wearing 8 different costumes. Human summarization, abstraction, hybrid methods, multi-document, multimedia evaluation as a whole. Each entry terminates in the same lac, annotated corpora, and a task-specified criterion of what counts as success. Mani says it plainly, that investment in this area alone will reap many dividends for summarization as a whole. The binding constraint on the field is measurement. An algorithm cannot be improved against a target nobody wrote down, so a discipline without ground truth accumulates methods instead of progress. Read backward. Every earlier chapter's inconclusiveness, extraction against abstraction, ad hoc against noisy channel, is that same absence surfacing as a comparison nobody could run.